Thank you all for coming in. Columbian is pleased to welcome representatives of Friends of Vancouver Lake.
Right.
Going to talk about some issues with the lake and with the milfoil infestation. And just so you know, we are recording this. We will post it unedited on our website, just to hopefully better inform the community. I'm Greg Jane, the editorial page editor. And we'll start out, we'll let y'all introduce yourselves. We'll start at this end.
My name is Jim Luce. I'm a Vancouver resident, have been for most of my life. I'm Larry Cassidy, and I live out in Lakeshore. Look at the lake every morning and every night, and have for 46 years. And I've worked for every governor since Dan Evans in some manner on fish and wildlife.
Okay.
I'm Ted Gathe, formerly Vancouver City Attorney for longer than I care to remember. Harassed frequently by Mr. Mize over there when he was reporting on City Hall.
Well, that's why we brought him back, to harass you.
And have a great interest in Vancouver Lake and the tributaries that flow into the lake too. I've been working with the Watershed Alliance of Southwest Washington, so we work on watershed issues as well.
So I'm Kathy Gillespie, and I got involved with Friends of Vancouver Lake through my acquaintance with some of the people on the board, but also as a member of the Vancouver Rowing Club. I was a member of the Masters team, and then my children participated with Alan Stewart, and it's a great program.
Great, and thank you again for joining us. Real quick, we've met with many of you in the past and have discussed the milfoil problem with the lake. So let's go over the basics. Could somebody just explain exactly what it is and exactly what we do?
Why don't you go ahead with that, Larry?
And then we'll get into where we are.
Eurasian Milfoil is a fast-growing, noxious weed, so to speak, that wasn't in the lake 2 years ago, or maybe 3 at the maximum. Where the algae issue has been around for a long time, that's not new and everybody's aware of it, but this Eurasian milfoil, it just grows like wildfire, and it will block the rowing lanes, it'll block the sailboat lanes, it'll close the lake to swimming as it did last year, and it really grows fast. If we don't do something this year, it will take over the lake by 2022, and it will not be a usable body of water at that time. It's just that kind of, and there's been examples of Eurasian milfoil all over the state of Washington. It's not new to anything but this area where we're trying to get it eradicated through the use of an herbicide. Now, I will tell you that there are the majority of people totally unaware that the lake is troubled to this extent. This is a big issue. The dependency on this lake for not just the rowing and the sailing, there's duck hunting, there's kayakers, there's sailboaters, there's just all kinds of activity that go on in the lake. And you can't imagine, if you really want to see what's going on, you can drop down there this weekend. They have the qualifying for the National Rowing Finals going on. And it's a big deal. In fact, you covered it in your paper this morning. And so it's a big deal, and the one example I keep always drawing to is that the Hilton Hotel calls Alan Stewart, who runs the rowing club, weekly saying, don't forget to tell him we got lots of rooms. Because during this weekend, there will be thousands of people here in Vancouver, from British Columbia to California to other states inside of California and Nevada that have rowing club status, trying to compete for these positions to go to the Nationals. And they all are staying in motels. They love to come to Vancouver because they don't have to fight Seattle traffic, they don't have to fight Portland traffic, and the restaurants will be full. It's just a great time for our community economically, let alone the beauty of what I perceived was the Great Lake that I look at every morning. I didn't realize that we had this kind of problem until Jim called me and said, you realize the lake's in serious trouble. I said, what are you talking about? I look at it every day. Well, it's in serious trouble, and to some degree, not just to some degree, to a major degree, I don't think it's fair to expect private money like we're raising to do this more than 1 year. The county, the city, and the port have to step up. And so I would take a moment and just let Jim talk to you about what we're sort of quasi-celebrating today. We've made some progress. We're not there yet. We got a ways to go. But we think we can get this done. And if we do it this year, it'll be about half of what it's going to cost next year if it doesn't get done. And we got the permit. And believe me, getting a private permit for a private party like we did was no easy task. Ecology kept saying, well, you need to have permission from the city and the county and the port before we can even consider you for a permit. I said, why? And
That's the state ecology department.
State Ecology Department. And then we met all their rules. We got the county, we got the city, we got the port to write letters of support of what we were doing, and that we now have the permit. But Jim, go ahead and talk about
we're here today really to celebrate what we've accomplished. We came together as a group of citizens last November when I got a phone call from Alan Stewart, who said, you wouldn't believe what's going on down at the lake, because the milfoil infestation is really going to make our rowing and our sailing club activities increasingly impossible. So a number of us got together and we formed Friends of Vancouver Lake. And since that point in time, we've accomplished, I think, quite a bit. We saw an issue, as Larry said, an issue that has environmental and economic aspects and benefits to our community. And we asked others to step up, like, Port, this is next to you. Will you step up? City, you got a park down there. Will you step up? County, how about you? And it's a little bit. There's a story about the little red hen. I don't know if you ever heard about it, but the little red hen says, who will bake my bread? And no one says, well, I don't want to do that. And the goose says, well, I don't want to do that. Well, eventually the little red hen bakes the bread, and then she says, well, who will eat my bread? Well, everyone wants to eat the bread. And so basically that's kind of the story here. We got together, we have incorporated. That was the first step. We have formed a relationship with the Vancouver Rowing Club to achieve 501c3 status. So all of our deductions, all of our contributions are tax deductible. We got insured because the port and the city and the county said, well, we'd love to help you, but we can't help you unless you're insured. And Larry Cassidy was very instrumental in helping us get insured. Then we started raising money because we heard this could cost a lot of money, and it will. And to date, we've raised $72,000. Furstenberg Corporation or Foundation has given us $25,000, which is a lot of money. 45. Excuse me, 45. I don't want to sell them short. $45,000. We may get additional funding from the Port of Vancouver. They're going to look at that at the end of the month, and we've asked them for $50,000, and we hope that they will be able to contribute that. We got a permit, as Larry said, that no one thought it was possible for a private group to get a permit from the Department of Ecology to go into a water body, a navigable lake, and kill the milfoil. But we got that permit, which many people thought it was impossible. And the city and the county and the port have all written letters now saying that you can have access. It's interesting, access. No one over their property. What's interesting here is no one owns up to ownership of Vancouver Lake. Who owns Vancouver Lake? Well, the port says they don't own it. They've got access. They've got the flushing channel, but they don't own the lake. The county says, well, we have some land, but we don't own it, and the city clearly doesn't own it. Department of Natural Resources says, well, we have jurisdiction over the navigable waters, but we don't own it. So one of the major issues is who owns the lake? If someone actually owned a lake, then you could go to them and say, tag, you're it, do the right thing, fix the lake. But that's not going to happen, and we decided early on that trying to decide that question was going to, it would take a long time, and the milfoil would have suffocated the lake by the time we got it done. So that's what we're celebrating today, and what we're going to hope to do going forward is something that Larry will talk about. He's briefly alluded to it, and that is the partnership program. The partnership program was a significant effort by the city, the county, the port, the state, both the Department of Ecology, DFW, DNR, and individual citizens, which ended in 2008. And we have as a goal, an overriding goal, let's get it going again. Because, as Larry said, and I'll turn it back to him, a group of individual citizens, I mean, we can raise the money, okay? Could be over $200,000. We're going to raise that money. But we can't do this year in, year out. The community needs to step up. This is a environmental and economic treasure, and we can't just let it die. So I'm going to stop there and...
Well, let me back up just
Sure.
real quick. Briefly, where did the milfoil come from?
That's a good question. Nobody seems to really
Okay.
know. Could it come in on a boat? It could have come in through the Flushing Channel, because there is milfoil out in areas in the main Columbia River, and so it could have come from any different source.
And then other question I had is, what is the permit for? You received the permit.
It's for authorization to eradicate with an herbicide 500 acres of Vancouver's Lake, which is about 2,500 acres. 2,300 acres total. And actually, Jim had his numbers a little confused. The partnership, called the Vancouver Lake Watershed Partnership of the city, county, and state, started in 2004 and went to 2014. But I think the recession sort of got everybody yawning about saying, well, geez, we got to cut somewhere and so on, and nobody's whining about Vancouver Lake, so here we go. And it really worked well. Each entity, city, county, and port, was contributing $50,000 a year for 10 years. And the lake was fairly well managed. Now, milfoil wasn't there then, but there is the ongoing situation with algae. There's also effluent from Burnt Bridge Creek, which, by the way, has a very active group inside the city that's working hard. I don't know if you belong to Royal Oaks, but they have a wildlife center that runs right through Burnt Bridge Creek, and they try and cleanse the water in some regard with natural processes. Salmon Creek had a group, but it sort of has faltered, and not much going on there, and it also contributes effluents. I mean, the economic success of Clark County is aware of it. Everybody knows about it, but every time they asphalt a parking lot or build a house, it's all great for the economy, and we support that, but it also contributes to more off-site non-point pollution that comes down those streams and other kinds of things. Lake River, which comes off the main Luce, you know where the North Fork and South and East Fork come together. The main Luce contributes the tidal impacts, as does the Flushing Channel, but mainly the main Luce. And so you also get excess phosphorus coming in, and could have been where the milfoil came. But there isn't any in Lake River to speak of, very small part. So we're coordinating with everybody that has a dog in this hunt, the tribes, the Port of Ridgefield, and other interested parties. There's a kayaking group that's very interested. We got money from the Corvallis Rowing Club, $3,000 they sent us, because they know how valuable it is to have Vancouver Lake for their rowing regattas like going on this weekend. So there's a lot going on, but we got a long ways to go. And what I think Jim said, and I would emphasize, it is not reasonable to expect private parties like us to fund this more than 1 year. They've got to step up and put that partnership back together, because, as I said, in 2022, this lake will be overtaken by milfoil. We think we can eradicate it fairly successful this year, and that's scheduled to go on about the middle of July, because that's when the lake is low, and so it's a proper time to get down there and really get to the roots of the plant.
How do you treat a lake in this kind of a situation?
I'm not positive, Scott, on how the actual technique, but it's an herbicide called Procillocor that is spread, I assume, through. They have boats and they go crisscross. We're going to do a survey first week in July to identify where the heavy milfoil is, and then they will I don't think it's a spray. I think it's an application where probably.
Maybe I could add a little bit to that, Larry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Procelicor is a brand new herbicide, brand new to Washington State. It's been approved by EPA, I think, in 2017, but it's just gone through the regulatory hoops through the Department of Ecology and will be ready and available, they tell us, the first week of July. It's an interesting application because it's a systemic product, so it goes right to the roots of the plant, and it works extremely well in a shallow lake like Vancouver Lake. It does not work well where there's a lot of volume of water movement because it needs to get into the plant's roots and stay there. But once it's there, it's incredibly effective, and it's worked extremely well in other states. And the thing we really like about it is its lack of toxicity. It has a half-life of 24 to 48 hours, which means that people can recreate in the lake within 1 to 2 days after this application is actually put there. A lot of the other products have a much longer period of off limits, and this one does not, and that's why it's very appealing to us to have the applicator use this one. He's also the only licensed person in the state right now for using Procelicor. So it's the ideal
Does
application.
it harm or kill anything else?
No,
or-
it
No,
does
it's,
not
in fact,
hurt
it went
fish,
through,
doesn't hurt wildlife,
When
waterfowl.
EPA approved it back in 2017, one of the things they tested it against was juvenile salmonid, which of course, is something we have a great concern about here, and it proved to be non-toxic to the small fish of that species. So that's the other important fact.
How much will it cost to treat the 500 acres?
Sorry?
How much will it cost to treat the 500 acres?
Well, it'll be somewhere between $180,000 to $200,000.
Okay.
Now, I don't have a rock hard quote. I'm working on that right now from the applicator, but we've met with him a couple of times, and he's about to put that into a formal quote. I want a document that says this is what it's going to cost you.
There
And-
are variables depending on the water depth of the lake. So
Right.
obviously that's affected by the time of year that you do it. So a big effort that has to happen first is to do sonograms, I guess, of the lake to find out what the depth is, and that's going to require a huge volunteer effort of 6 separate launches, Loran equipment, technical equipment. The applicator is going to be coming to help. We're having to recruit something like 50 volunteers over 2 days to spend 12 hours each day surveying the lake to determine how much of the product needs to be applied. So it's not too much or too little, because every ounce of it costs money. I wanted to say, to add to what was being talked about earlier, is that this is not a difficult problem. This happens in waterways all over the United States, as far as I'm aware. And what the problem is that we don't have a system of agencies working together to monitor the health of the lake. And so that's the real problem. It's kind of like not monitoring the leaks that you're getting in your home and waiting for the roof to cave in. If you monitor the leaks and you address the leaks on a regular basis, the cost is smaller and you don't have any big problem. So this is a invasive species that exists, but with proper management, the dollars would be less, and the well-being of the waterway would be at a more constant level. So this is really a problem of process and agencies not working together and remaining collaborating to take care of something that's now caused a problem that this group is trying to address with help from other agencies, but it certainly didn't need to happen. It doesn't need to be as extensive or as expensive as it is now.
Well, I think we do need to give a shout out to ecology and say they're not neglecting this problem.
Yeah.
And they in fact funded a study that Clark County is administering to study all the aquatic noxious weeds in the lake, finish that survey this year, and then in 2020 they said, we can treat. Well, that's too late as far as we're
Too late,
concerned.
yeah.
It's a year way too late, which is why we jumped into the effort now. But I don't want to let me say that ecology isn't doing anything. They are doing something. And I would be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to my favorite politician, Representative Sharon Wiley, who helped coordinate meetings with ecology earlier this winter so that we could sit around the table with them and tell them where we were going, what we needed to do, and get them on board. And so
Sharon was very effective.
it's been a
getting
community
a
effort.
group together in Olympia, and when she said be there, they were there.
Yeah.
That included DNR and ecology and people from WDFW and several other people that are involved in these kinds of issues. Now, Kathy is our sort of our communications boss with regard to this, and she might want to talk about our fundraiser coming up.
Oh, we do have a big fundraiser set for June 9th. It's a Sunday afternoon, 3:30 to 5:30 at the Vancouver Lake Sailing Club. And our goal is to have, 100 or more people come to help us raise awareness of the issue and fundraise specifically. We would like to raise, at least $10,000 to $15,000 to help us make a big dent in the money that we have left to raise. It's significant. The number seems to be growing every day, really. So.
And this fundraiser for Friends of Vancouver Lake.
Yeah.
So I have a question. So the weed is in Vancouver Lake now. Now, can it be completely eradicated, or is it every year it's going to have to be retreated? So
Every year.
You can never get rid of it.
Every
Every
year
year.
there'll be a maintenance effort,
Yeah.
Okay.
significantly lower in cost than what it's going to take to eradicate it that is in its present status now. I think the numbers were like, as I say, it could be as high as 180 to 200,000 to eradicate it now, and I think it was like 30,000 to. I'm throwing out numbers that I'm not real accurate on, but significantly less to just sort of maintain the milfoil. Doesn't address the algae or the effluent issues, or probably the need to dredge the lake deeper so it's more acidic, because it gets pretty shallow in some spots. But all that is what we would think has to be done by the three members of the former partnership. It's just not reasonable to expect us to do this, but we're doing it anyway. And actually,
I think you mentioned Furstenberg, was it? And then where else have you received donations?
well, I contributed significantly myself personally. We've had money from.
I put in a little.
Our fundraising efforts are just really getting started because we needed to really get that permit taken
Yeah.
care of. So now
And
that
when
that's
was that?
done,
When was
I
the
think it
permit
just
approved?
happened last
week ago.
week.
About a week ago, we
good.
got the
Yeah.
permit,
Permit
so
has
we've
been
sort of
issued.
been just keeping wraps on everything going on.
Right.
'Cause and anybody could have raised an issue about, well, what are they going to do to the lake? And I don't want anything eradicated. I don't want anything. So we just waited until we got the permit approved, and now we're sort of flexing our muscles a little bit with more efforts. But I'm trying to think of all the particular. I know I'm meeting with the condo owners across on the west side of Lakeshore Avenue or Lakeshore Boulevard tomorrow night, 6:30, and the former CEO of the port is now Larry Paulson is now the homeowner president. So he got set up to introduce it because they have an interest just like I do. Anybody that looks at that lake has got to say,
Yeah,
you
they're looking at it every day.
you got to be kidding me. Do you think there's that kind of problem? Well, it's a real problem. And it's growing right now. I just got a report from the rowing club guy, Alan Stewart, who said, it's coming up. But we've got to wait till the right time to really whack it good. And it's so important to do it this year. And we just couldn't get the wheels of government moving fast enough. Ecology has grants available. And they said, we'll help you get those grants in second year and third year, but we can't get moving that fast. And private party can. So in that respect, we had an advantage, and that's what we're aiming on. We've also had a anonymous contribution of $50,000 from two industrialists here in Clark County, and I've put it up on a matching basis. And if the port matches it, then we get their money as well. And I know, Jeff, you asked who they are, and I'm not comfortable sharing that yet, just because we got to make sure the port steps up, and that will be fairly soon. But I promise you, because you were the most interested, I will personally call you once we get that information released. I don't know if that makes you happy or not, but it's a start.
Reporters are always happy when their phone rings. So, quick question. So if there had been an entity that was responsible for overseeing and monitoring Vancouver Lake, how much less would it have been if they'd have treated the milfoil last year?
I have no idea.
Would it have been substantially less costly?
Yeah, it would have been because there wasn't much milfoil. It's doubling fast, and so it's a shame that we don't have that video.
We have a map.
I could have brought my laptop and shown it to you all. In 2017, it was just rimmed around various areas. In 2018, it tripled in size. In 2022, it'll take over the whole lake. And,
So it goes very.
so it
kind of
grows fast.
exponentially.
Yeah, and as I say, it wasn't there
I
before.
can pass that around. That's a graph that an engineer
Okay, yeah.
supports us showed, and he basically, and that's just a projection, but nonetheless, it shows the extent that milfoil could grow, and like Larry said, by 2022, it could actually engulf the entire lake.
And if we start now, and if coming off of this private effort, the long-term management plan is jump-started by the partnership group, then I think going forward we'll be in a much, much better position, not only to deal with milfoil, but to deal with other issues that the lake has. One of the issues that I've learned about that I didn't know about was carp. There are a lot of carp in Lake Vancouver. Didn't know that. And carp and milfoil, well, let's put it this way. Carp spread milfoil. They get down there in the mud and they root around and they knock the milfoil loose and the milfoil floats. And when the milfoil floats somewhere, it grows somewhere. And so one of the things that I think in the longer term we're going to have some fun with is maybe a carp derby. We're meeting with some people who actually put on carp derbies. And one of the goals, or one of the priorities actually of the partnership group coming out, the highest priority, was let's help eradicate the carp. Let's reduce the number of carp in the lake. So that's one of the things that I think we can look at going forward, and on the fishing side will be kind of potentially fun. So I think that to the extent that we can do that, the other issue, really over the horizon radar that I kind of like to focus on, is what can the Corps of Engineers do? Corps of Engineers played a key role, obviously very key role, as it did our Senate delegation, on the Flushing Channel, and then creating the dredging which led to the lake. Well, you have an infrastructure bill. At least rumor is, at some point in time, in some decade, Congress will pass an infrastructure bill. The Corps, I am told, is already authorized to work in the river, and the lake is, to some extent, an extension of the river, its title. So would the Corps of Engineers be able to utilize its resources, its financial resources, to help? Maybe both with the Flushing Channel, maybe both with more dredging, I don't know. But I think we need a group reformed to think about these issues and to get ready for them in the event they come. And I think eventually an infrastructure bill will come. So the other thing that is interesting that sometimes happens in lakes that have milfoil is they don't always use an herbicide. It's somewhat controversial, but some lakes actually have a lawnmower. And the lawnmower that fits into the lake, and they mow the milfoil, and they dump it on the shore, and it composts. Anybody who wants to use milfoil compost, actually some of it actually is sold. But the milfoil can be mowed. So one of the things going forward, if the partnership group gets back together again, you could look at the city, the county, and the port buying a milfoil machine and then having a joint operating agreement to maintain this machine and just run it every year. Yes, when you mow it, the milfoil floats around. But that's the beauty of the machine. It floats around, it resets itself, it gets mowed again. So there's a lot of options dealing with milfoil long term. But if it's not dealt with this year, it's going to be twice as expensive next year, and by the following year, it will suffocate the lake.
You know, it's interesting too. As I say, I've lived on it for 46 years looking at it, and that lake's been around for at least 4,000 years. It's not a new body of water. And even though, of course, with the Flushing Channel, brought in water, then pushed water out, and so on in a different manner than in the past. But it's been around a long time, and it's a viable economic and environmental asset for our county. There's just no question about it. And as I say, people got to get in gear.
I think one of the neat things about, being a part of this effort is seeing that this partnership, this 10-year partnership that expired in 2014, that the seeds of that remain. There's still a caring and commitment from this community and from different players in different places to want to kind of restart. That's what it feels like to me, is that when that was abandoned, it wasn't really abandoned, because I've read the articles that the Columbian did the coverage, the $21 million that the Corps of Engineers spent, the creation of the island in the middle from the dredging refuge, the partnership and how much was contributed. It seemed like there was like this little stutter when people said, well, we've been at this for 10 years, what do we do next? And I don't know enough about the history, but it seems like this is a great time to reimagine that partnership. And I think the success that we've had and the good feedback from county and city and the port and the state officials and our delegation from the 49th, I think it just shows people just want to get on a train that's moving, and this train is moving.
Well, I was going to ask, what kind of response have you gotten from the city, the county, and the port?
I think
Good.
Well,
They
I
buy
think-
in?
Yeah, I think they've all had varying responses, and part of it goes back to the ownership issue that Jim brought
Right.
up. At some point in time, the port owned the bottom of the lake and the tidelands. They claim that somewhere 100 or so years ago, they transferred the bottom land of the lake, the bottom of the lake, back to the state. States never really acknowledged that, so that's still an issue. But clearly, the port owns tidelands all the way around its property ownership. The county has a 200-acre regional park, which is really, it's a major park in this county, and they have I think, a very fundamental responsibility for the lake. They also have a noxious weed board, which none of the other public agencies have. So they're uniquely situated, I think, to perhaps be one of the lead players
And it's the
in this.
county?
That's the county, yeah.
It's a county, right?
The city, well, I just realized after spending 25 years with the city that Vancouver Lake is not in the city limits. In fact, if you look at the boundary line, it snakes around the lake to the point where the city really doesn't have any ownership interest in the lake, aside from a few parcels that abut the lake. However, Vancouver Lake Park, which is owned by the county, is within the city limits. So there's that tangential relationship between them all. So the city's position has been, one, Birdbridge Creek contributes somewhere between 5 to 8% of what we call the nutrient load that flows, the bad stuff that flows into Vancouver Lake. So a very small percentage. Given that they don't have ownership of the lake and they're not contributing a huge amount, nevertheless, they're willing to be partners, but perhaps not exactly at the same level as the port and the county. The county, as I say, I think should be the lead agency. The port has had Vancouver Lake has played an important role in the port's history since it was formed. And so I think those two need to be the leaders, with the city backstopping the efforts. And right now, each of those agencies is contributing $50,000 a year, but that money is going to the Lower Columbia River Estuary Group, which I am not critical of them at all, but their purpose and what they use those funds for are educational in nature. And you have to ask yourself, what are they educating people about? How to watch a lake die? Whatever the money's going for. The monies ought to be repurposed, and they ought to be coming back and be more wisely spent on the efforts that we're involved in going forward.
I'm sorry, who contributes that? Is it
The city,
port?
the county, and the port each contribute.
Each of them do?
Each of them
Okay.
contribute, yeah, annually.
But the
They formally contributed that, according to your articles and your coverage, to the partnership, to the
Right.
lake partnership.
Right.
It was like 1.5 million over.
I was on the Power Council for 10 years in Bonneville, and the Power Council contributed to the Lower Columbia River Estuary Group, and I am not shy about saying, what are you doing with that money? And as I did with a lot of things, and I wasn't the most popular member of the Power Council, but it was interesting, because you're right, it was for education, and we're supposed to be spending ratepayer money at the Power Council in Bonneville to save fish and wildlife. So probably in a
So I have a question.
long distance way that was true. Have you ever been down to the Sailing Club?
Mhm.
I never had before. That's where we're holding our fundraiser. And I've got an invitation. And I know,
There's
it's
an
amazing.
invitation.
I've got an invitation for you. I'm not asking you to come. Jeff, if you want to come,
It's a
I'll comp you.
professional
If you want to be
conflict.
down there, so you don't have to pay for $100 to get in there. But I think it's gonna be a smash event.
So here's a question. Does, I know, well, Lacamas Lake, do they have the same problem in Lacamas Lake?
They have, I'm not sure it's a milfoil issue, but they have similar issues with algae and growth functions. They might have milfoil, I'm not sure.
It's a
I'm not sure
deeper
either.
lake.
Oh,
I mean,
so
this
that's
is a very
different.
shallow lake.
Yeah,
So the-
And because it's warm, because it's shallow, it gets warm. And when it gets warm, milfoil grows.
it really grows fast.
So that means one of the issues longer term, very longer term, again, partnership, flow. How does the water column circulate? Well, 80% of it comes in through Lake River, and maybe 10% comes in through the flushing channel. Is there some way to stir up the water more, increase the water flow? Now, again, that is my over-the-horizon radar. I mean, that's a long-term issue. That's the sort of issue that this partnership group can focus on.
Well, how about the silt and the algae in the lake?
That should be studied, Scott, in this grant that's going on this year. And they should not only talk about milfoil, but the algae and the noxious weed issues that really are beyond our scope. All of us weren't very educated when we started this in late December, early January, but we're learning fast. And most of my knowledge is about milfoil. But I'm really impressed with the fact that I've lived here all these years, and I'd never been out of the Sailing Club. And they've got a beautiful par 3 golf course down
Yeah,
there, too.
that's a nice area.
It's just an interesting area, and I keep knocking my head saying, well, where have I been? So it's really interesting. And those landowners are contributing too. It's just a matter, we just got to keep pressing people. I've raised a lot of money for political parties and political candidates for years. This is a lot more receptive. People, I haven't found anybody yet. If we can get to them fast enough and long enough, we'll raise the money.
Yeah.
I'm very confident of that. It's a lot different than trying to raise money for a politician and say, no one really knows.
Plus, it's tax deductible. We're single purpose in the sense of milfoil, and our whole thought going into this was we need a win. For the partnership group to be reconstituted, for people to feel like they can do something, somebody needs to show them a win. You know, we did it. And if you show people a win, maybe other people, maybe the city, county, and port will say, well, look, they did it. I guess we should step up too. So that was the thought going in, is if we can win this one, then we can jumpstart the continuing effort by the community.
And we're going to win it. I'm not at all worried about that. It'll just take a little longer than I anticipated, but we'll get it done. And away we go. But I don't want to sound repetitive, but it's just not reasonable to expect this lake to exist and be healthy without government entities in the local community as well as state getting involved. And that's our overriding goal. Current one is to get the milfoil eradicated. Second one is keep pushing, and we have a fairly effective board. Luce has been around a long time. I've been around a long time. Ted's worked with the city. Kathy has been active in government. We can keep the pressure on, and we intend to. I said to the port yesterday, I don't expect that any stone will be unturned by us keeping the pressure on to get it done. We're gonna get it done. And of course, if you all would like to give us money, we'd appreciate it.
Anything else?
What's the long-term vision then for the Friends group? So obviously you are organized for fighting the urgent problem, but get the milfoil treated this year, and then will you be there as an advocate for Vancouver Lake?
Oh, absolutely.
in the long-term future?
Absolutely. We are incorporated as a nonprofit. Our attorney is Jim David, and he has applied for 501c3 status directly for Friends of Vancouver Lake. And
Yeah, just, do you have that for, is the status, or are you working on it?
no, we have associated with the Vancouver Rowing Club, which does have 501c3 status. So if someone wants to give us money, they just have to make out the check to the Lake Milfoil Fund, and they will get a response back that says this is a 501c3 deductible item that you have contributed. Congratulations. And so that way
But
we
Friends of
can-
Vancouver Lake is applying
Fine,
separately.
okay.
Yeah.
And I know that
But it
takes
does,
time.
it does take,
Yeah.
So and sometime it takes about 6 months, 8 months to get a 501c3 established, and just a slow process. But we'll get there on our own. And yeah, we're going to stay active because we haven't even begun to solve the big hurdle of getting the tri-partnership back into existence. It's a shame it ever got disbanded, but who knows?
I think in a parallel track that could consume a lot of time but would be very interesting and ultimately really beneficial would be to establish the ownership of the lake bed, of the waters, and all of those things. I think, maybe that's your project, I'm not sure, but
Lifetime project.
yeah, that would be a really beneficial thing to determine.
I thought about filing title to it just to see
Yeah.
what would happen, wake some people up. But
If nobody else is claiming it.
nobody else
Yeah.
is claiming
Native
it.
Americans from the area or anything?
What's that?
Native Americans, I mean, originally.
Just haven't
was
seen.
their lake.
Haven't seen
There were a
anything.
number of bands, if you go back and look at the Lewis and Clark journals, there were a number of different tribal bands, not tribes obviously, tribal bands in the Lake River area. Many of them were from the Willamette Valley. So there's no clear tribal involvement. There ceded lands under the tribes when the tribes were established. There's some ceded lands. We're working with the Cowlitz. The Chinook also had a presence there. So the tribal people need to be active and part of this. The other people, maybe the other entity that needs eventually, possibly, over the horizon to be part of this is Bonneville. Because the Bonneville Power Administration, really the operation of the hydro and the core, this is a hydro dam or a hydro lake. I mean, it comes up and it goes down based upon the fluctuations in the hydro system. Bonneville has made a substantial contribution in the Camas area, working in the area out there, and we're going to eventually probably turn to Bonneville. Off-site mitigation funds are possible. I spent 25 years of my life working as a Bonneville attorney. I know a little bit about Bonneville and about Bonneville funding, and there's a lot of funding available. As Larry said, most of it goes through the Power Council. So that's another source. But we got to get back together again, and we're going to do it.
Yeah, and it's a great time because we've got the Vancouver waterfront, and then I think it's the county parks that's working very hard on the Lewis and Clark Trail to connect with the lake. So this is really a time to recognize all the jewels in the crown, I think, of this region, and really just say we see a future for this to all be brought together for the benefit of everybody to recreate.
And the lake will be increasingly used by people who use the waterfront. I mean, our community has become a stronger waterfront community. And people who kayak down at in the apartments at the waterfront, you can't put your kayak in the Columbia River at the waterfront. It doesn't work too well. But in terms of marketing, Vancouver Lake is right there. It's 1.5 miles or 2 miles from your apartment to take your kayak out there and recreate or fish or hunt. So, there's a lot of synergies there in our community right now.
Great. Well, thank you all for
Thanks for
joining
your
us.
Hey, thank you very
time.
much
Thank
for
you.
the time.